Alright. Hi, my name is Josh. I'm here to refute Trajan's speech on standardized testing. He made 3 points in his claim of fact speech, saying standardized tests are unreliable measures of student performance. The Montes test corruption is consuming instruction time, and standardized tests are imprecise measure of teacher performance, yet they are used to reward and punish teachers. Well, throughout Trajan's speech, he did a lot of emphasis on student performance on standardized testing, as he went through each and every single one through anxiety and ill preparation, and as well as no student doesn't really want to do the test. What I've seen is that is somewhat untrue, as students do have the ability to perform well on these tests. It's not not because they're anxious about the test. It is very uncommon for students to be anxious. A test run by the University of Arkansas in 2001 said the vast majority of students do not exist stress and have positive attitudes towards standardized testing programs. So this meant that students weren't really, scared or even about those tests, and as well as their performance on it shouldn't be defaulted on it. He also mentioned that the standardized testing isn't a really accurate way of determining how student performance or teacher performance, but he didn't go too much detail about it. As I read up on his articles, they have actually mentioned that teacher performance is not a factor for student performance from the standardized testing, as teacher performance actually improves those students if they choose to take part in these tests, because there's some students who do not. And he also mentioned international students have a problem with standardized testing. That is true because of the language barrier, but it is not it shouldn't factor out that our education system is failing these students, as the standardized testing is a norm in most countries now. They also face it in their own countries, but this is US we're talking about, and their language is a barrier, but there is counters to that where they do help them with tests in their own language as well, I've seen. When he went into instruction time, he mentioned a little bit, but he mentioned that teachers focus on the test, and not really. They focus on what type of material is going to be on test, what type of concepts. So if they do see it, they have an ability to determine how the test will be ran and how they can solve each one. And for the teacher performance, he mentioned little to nothing, as he said they can be subjugated to be terminated or just have problems against them, which is untrue. Even though they do have performance evaluations on these standardized testings, it doesn't mean that they have a punishment from it. It means that they use it to improve their students' goals and grades and help them reform themselves so they can benefit future students instead of the older students that they've seen to have failed in the past. Thank you.
All right, Josh, just real quick, you identified the advocate's claims. I think there needed to be a clearer preview because it just seemed like you were going through the issues one at a time as you went through the speech, and I didn't always know what the ultimate impact of the advocate's argument was and how the secondary claim supported that, and as a consequence, it's not always clear how your response addresses that. The best argument that you had was the one that in essence said that the notion that student performance is affected by anxiety isn't really true, because you had a piece of information that answered that particular point, so that's good. If the advocate didn't show how important anxiety was or suggested that anxiety was of significant importance, at least you've got a good answer on that. The whole idea that the tests are being used in evaluating the teachers, you kind of question that. You say that that's not true. You argue that it's used primarily for evaluating the performance of the students and targeting where they're going to do better. That all sounds like a good point, although it all sounds asserted also. So you need some evidence to suggest that that's the case, that student performance on tests isn't being used to evaluate the teachers. And the notion that international students are affected by this, I don't know how significant that was in the advocate's argument. It sounds to me like it would be a relatively small proportion of most of the testing issues that we're talking about. If we're talking about SAT exams, for example, it may not be that significant at all. If it's students who are not native speakers or they have a bilingual issue that's going on in their home versus school, that could be another argument, and I think that could be developed a little bit more, but that's an argument that says that there's a language barrier, not that there's a problem with the test. I think that's the argument that you ought to be making here, not, that these attributing the wrong cause in this particular situation. Look, you follow the structure very clearly, but some of the claims that you make in response, I don't really know what the impact of those arguments is. I'm not sure that there was a very clear impact of the advocate's arguments, and I think that's one of the things that you ought to point out first, is that they're a little ambiguous as to what they were arguing, and so your answers, if they are sometimes ambiguous, that simply reflects the reality of what the argument was. That might get you out of a little bit of that complexity there, sort of a catch-22 that you're stuck in. All right, thank you.